When exporting VAT to game engines, we need both displacement and normal textures, so I'm going to check on the option for normal textures. My frame range is already correctly set for this animation from frame 66 to frame 100. This particular model is made up of 3 individual objects. I have one for the skirt, one for the body, and one for the eyes. Each of those objects has its own UV map and its own material. So my combined VAT object will have 3 of each. So I will select all 3 of those objects, click on Bake Objects, and I'll sort them alphabetically, and then click Bake Objects and wait for the bake to complete. Okay, with that done, I can hide the original animated object, and I can come down to the VAT object in its own VAT collection, and let's have a look at the result. As expected, we have issues due to UV maps, which need to be corrected. So let's go and have a look at that in the UV editor. As you can see, I have 4 UV maps. The automatically generated VAT Man UV, but we don't need to pay attention to that just now. I have the original UV map, which is for the skirt, as I can see, then body UVs, clearly for the body, and eyes UVs. I need to combine all of these UV coordinates into one single UV map, so I'm going to transfer from body and eyes into the top one there, the UV map. So as I know, I need the coordinates for the body vertices. I'll select all of them, and I will transfer from body UVs to UV map. Transfer. Now I'll do the eyes, so I'll quickly hide the body. Make sure I've got all the vertices of the eyes selected. And I'll transfer coordinates from eyes UVs to UV map. And there we go. Now my model is looking as she should. And I can get rid of these UV maps, eyes UVs and body UVs, leaving me with one single UV map for materials and one set of VAT UVs. I'll quickly give that newly created animation a name. I'll call it Catwalk. And before starting this video, I created 4 other versions of this model, all with different animations. And number 5. So I'm going to combine or merge all of these objects into one. I'll select all 5 of them, click on Merge VATs, sort them alphabetically, and click on Merge. And there we go. Now I can hide the VAT collection, and let's have a look at the newly created merged object. Looking pretty good. 5 materials, as we would have expected. And all of the materials are working perfectly with no need for correction. So I'll just sort out their names to leave only the name of the actual animations. And there we go. While I'm at it, I'm going to give my object a name. I'll call her Cloth Dancer. And I'll rename the materials as well to be more easily recognized. Cloth Dancer Body and Cloth Dancer Eyes. There we go. My UV maps are correct and ready to go. My materials are correct and ready to go. Animations are all in order. And with that, we are ready to export. So let's roll down here to the export panel and let's have a look at what we've got. When exporting, we have 3 options to check on or off, depending on whether or not you want those things to be exported. Export data will export the VAT textures and a text file including the VAT data and settings for export. Export mesh speaks for itself, and you can choose the format in which you want to export that mesh. I'm going to be exporting to Unity and to Godot. Unity will want FBX and Godot will want GLB. Finally, there is export images. This option will export any and all textures that it finds in the materials associated to the object. So with all that, I'm going to make sure all of these options are selected on. And I'll choose Export VAT Files. I'll browse to a folder or create a new one where I want to save all this data and simply click on Export VAT Files. There's no need to give anything any names. Wait for the exporting to complete. There we go. And here is all of my saved VAT data. I have my FBX file. I have the 2 VAT textures. These are the textures found in the materials. And this is the text file with the VAT settings. We're looking good. One last thing to do is to export a GLB version of the mesh for use in Godot. So I'll deselect export data and export images, select GLB to export the mesh, and export VAT files. Browse to that same folder and click export VAT files. And there is my GLB. To demonstrate using VAT particles in Unity as well, I'm also going to quickly bake out the particle snake demo. Displacement and normal should be set. I'm going to set my frame range to 51 and end at 300. I have my particle emitter selected and I'm going to generate random UV indices. Let's just go ahead and bake this particle system. This is probably the slowest the VAT Man will ever be when baking a very large particle system and generating both displacement and normal textures. Okay, there we go. I'll hide the original particle system and let's quickly check out the baked VAT version. With that object selected, back down to export, I'll select all three options and first I'm going to export the FBX version. I'll create a new folder for this data. We'll call it particle snake. Open that folder and export VAT files. Already done. I'll export the GLB version as well in the same folder. And there we go. And with that, we're ready to go and have a look at importing to Unity and Godot. Here we are in Unity with a fresh new project. And this project is a URP, a Universal Rendering Pipeline project. Though the VAT Man will work equally well with all kinds of render pipelines in Unity, be it built-in, universal, or high definition. First thing to do is to import the VAT Man for Unity package. So I'll simply drag it into the Assets folder, and we'll import all of these assets. There we go. Now see at the top we have a new Tools option under which you'll find offnodes and noodles, and the VAT Man manager. Will click to open that, and here is the manager. I'm going to drag the manager over here and dock it beside the main inspector. Now I'm going to create some folders to organize my project. First I'll create one for my imported FBXs, and a second one for textures. There we go. The import of VAT Man for Unity has created a materials folder, so that's good to go. But inside the textures folder, I'm going to create a subfolder for my cloth dancers textures. And there we have it. Now let's start by dragging in our FBX file for the cloth dancer that we have just exported from Blender. And there she is. Let's have a look in the inspector. We don't need to change anything here. We're just going to extract the materials. Click on Extract. And I'll create a subfolder inside the materials folder for my cloth dancers materials. And there we go. Now let's come down to the textures and let's drag in our textures. I'm going to get all of the textures. These are the two VAT textures. And these are the material textures. Drag them all in. There we go. Very quickly, I'm going to set up the two normal textures as normal textures so Unity treats them correctly. There we have it. Now, let's drag in our model. Come down here and have a look. I'm just going to make sure she's placed at 0, 0, 0. There she is. Now over to the VAT Man manager with the object selected. First thing to do is to add a VAT controller. You can do this through the manager simply by clicking on this little button here, or alternatively, you can add the VAT controller as a standard Unity component in the usual way. Now let's get the VAT settings from the exported text file. I'm just going to select all and copy. Now back to Unity and paste the settings into this little text field window right here. Click on Load Settings, and the manager is now prepared to receive all the various assets associated to this VAT. We'll begin with the VAT textures. The displacement texture goes in the first texture slot right there, followed by the normal texture. And now we'll get all our materials and drop them onto this little rectangle here. We have 3 materials. Over they come. And now I'm going to reselect my object. Everything's in order, so let's click on Apply Settings. And if your model at this point goes pink, it's because the material that you've chosen is not set up to work with the rendering pipeline. So let's see how we fix that. Let's come over to Materials and Shader Graphs. There are 2 pre-made template shaders to work with VAT Man here, one for standard meshes and one for particles. I'm currently using the VAT Man template for this particular model. So I'll double click that shader graph to open it. By the way, you want to make sure that you do have the shader graph package installed. To make sure of that, click on Window, then Package Manager. And right here in the search field, type shader. And you should see shader graph appear right there. If you do not, here where you see Packages in Project, click there and then select Unity Registry. And again, type in shader. You'll see shader graph, and if you do not have it installed here, you'll see the options to install it. We do have the shader graph installed and ready to go, and this is in fact the VAT Man template shader. So let's come over here to Build Targets, and we just want to add the universal render pipeline as a target. There we go. Down here we can set the options. I'll usually turn on alpha clipping, but you're by no means required to do that. You can have several versions of this shader, perhaps one with alpha clipping turned on, one without, one with just front face rendering, perhaps one with both. The options are entirely up to you. With the universal render pipeline target added, we can now save that asset. And let's go back to our scene, and there is our model. Select her again and come down here to the animations section of the VAT Man Manager panel. We have all the imported animations as we would have expected. Hip hop, walk, and jog. She's not animated while editing. She won't be animated until the game is actually started, but you can scrub through the animation with the scrubber right here to see all the frames and to make sure we have no errors. Errors can happen here like they did in Blender, and we have the same correction options available for each material should those errors present themselves, but we seem to be in good shape right here. So as far as VAT is concerned, this object is already ready to go. All I have to do is to add the textures and so on to the materials. So let's come over here. We have, first up, we have the skirt material. Now all of the VAT Man template materials have the same options. We have choices for the type of input we want to use for albedo, smoothness, and normal. For albedo, you can choose to use a simple color, which you select here. You can choose to use a single texture or a texture array. For my skirt, I have an albedo texture. So I'll drag that over and drop it into the window and tell the shader to use that texture. There it is. I also have a normal texture. I'll drop it in there and tell the shader to use it. There we go. And that is the skirt material complete and ready. Next up we have the eyes material. Let's just come in close and have a look at her eyes. Again, I have a texture to use for this material, so I'll drag it in, tell the shader to use it, and there are her eyes. I'm going to use a simple value for the smoothness, turn it up to about 0.8, 0.9, something like that. And smooth shading will be more than sufficient for the normals. Finally, let's look at her body material. Once again, I have an albedo texture. Tell the shader to use it. I have a roughness texture, but Unity will expect a smoothness texture. So I'm going to make some changes to that texture here in the inspector. First of all, I'm going to choose single channel from the texture type menu right there. The channel that I'm going to use will be the red channel, and I'm going to use the swizzle options to invert that channel. So I'm going to choose 1-R. That will invert the roughness texture, changing it into a smoothness texture. So let's come back to my models materials, and I'll drop in the roughness texture, tell the shader to use it, and there she is, looking good. Finally, we have our normals texture, drop it in and tell the shader to use it. And there she is, complete. 3 materials, complete with VAT animations, textures, and all correctly set up and ready to go. Let's have a quick look at her animated. I'm going to set up the camera to point directly at her, and we'll go into play mode. And there she is. I can select her from the hierarchy there and change the animations at runtime. Now here we have 2 little options to look at, freeze on start and the number of total loops. They're fairly self-explanatory. If you choose freeze on start, when you select an animation, it will not start playing automatically. It'll jump to the first frame of that animation and stop there until you unpause the animation, just like that. And total loops, clearly, we can choose to loop the animation a certain number of times, only once, perhaps twice, and a value of 0 in this field will give you infinite loops of the animation. And there you go, that is your first VAT object imported into Unity and ready to go. Next up, let's have a little look at importing a particles animation. It is very slightly different, though not entirely. I'm going to have to change the target of the particles material as I did for the VAT Man template. So right here in shader graphs, I'm going to open the VAT Man particle template and add the universal render target and very quickly adjust the settings as I did before. In this case, I'm going to choose both for render face, and I'll turn alpha clipping on, save the asset, and we're ready to go. Let's drag in our FBX. I'm just going to go to the particle snake folder, drag in that FBX. This will take a little longer than before because this is a much bigger model with many more vertices. Let's have a look in the inspector, extract the materials as before. Under materials, new folder, particle snake, and select folder. Let Unity do its thing. There we go. We'll get another subfolder under the textures folder. Particle snake. And let's drag in our textures. We only have the VAT textures in this case. Drag them in. And there we have it. So we'll drag in our model to the editor. Set it at 000 as before. Choose the VAT Man, and I'm going to remove the settings from the previous import. Let's open the particle snake VAT settings, select all, and copy. Paste the settings into the text field, and make sure we have the object selected. We'll add the VAT controller. Now we'll load those settings. Drag in our textures as before, displacement and then normal. And finally, we'll get the particle snake material. Drop it into the manager, but this time we want to use a different shader. As we saw before, it's the VAT Man particle template shader. We can either click here on the little circle and choose the particle template from there, or alternatively, you can, as always, select it and drag it from the hierarchy here and drop it onto that little rectangle. With the object selected, I'm going to click on Apply Settings. And there are my particles. Let's go and have a look at the material. I shouldn't have to change very much. First thing I'm going to change is the shading option, currently set to smooth shading. They look a little strange, so I'll switch it to flat, and they instantly look a lot better. Let's check the animation, see if we have to do any correction. We probably will. Yeah, there it goes. Okay, I'm going to start by dragging the correction downwards. That seems to be the okay, perfect. That seems to be the right direction immediately. And we're already fixed. Excellent. We only have one animation for this object. Let's have a quick look at it. Looking very good. Pause, play. We choose to freeze on start to have it freeze on frame 1. And when I start to play it, I want it to play only one time. Let's see how we do. Flying around, dropping particles, and freeze. Excellent. As part of the VAT Man particle template material, I have added a start color and an end color. Currently, the material is set up to use these different colors completely at random. Let's go and have a look at the arrangement of the shader. Here you can see that I've used the VAT particles random, which is controlling this lerp node, and here are the two colors. I can alternatively take the particle age from the VAT Man node and use that to lerp between the two colors. I'll save that asset. And now you can see that the particles are actually different colors depending on how old they are, depending on their age essentially. Oops, I have the wrong object selected. And there we go. If you don't want the colors to change, all you have to do is to copy this color into this field and the particles will all be of one unique color. The VAT textures section of the material inspector we will very rarely need to use, along with VAT settings. All of these are set by the VAT Man manager. And with that, we now know all we need to know about using the VAT Man in Unity. Here we are in Godot with a brand new project and an empty scene. First thing to do is to import the VAT Man manager. So I'm going to bring up the contents of the downloaded zip file, the VAT Man for Godot zip file. Here are the contents, and I'm also going to bring up the folder for the assets related to my new scene. Very simply, copy all of those folders into the new project. And let's go back to Godot, and we see them all appear there in the File System Explorer. Now we need to enable the plugin. We'll click on Project, then Project Settings. Come to the Plugins tab, and there's the manager right there, so we'll enable it. And the VAT Man manager will appear in the right-hand panel right there. Now I'm going to create some folders to keep my project organized. I'm going to create one for imported GLB files, one for materials, one for textures. And the first model I'm going to be importing will be my Cloth Dancer export. So I'll create a subfolder in the textures folder for those textures. There we go. I'll bring up the folder with all of my Cloth Dancer assets and I'll drag that GLB into the GLB folder. Just get to the Cloth Dancer folder right there and drag all those textures in. There we go. So first thing to do is to select the two VAT textures and come up here to import settings. We need the VAT textures to be the highest possible quality. So I'm going to right here under detect 3D and compress to, I'm going to select disabled and re-import those textures, and that is the texture sorted and ready to go. So let's come up here to our imported GLB and I'm going to double click to open that scene as Godot refers to it. Godot's LOD system can be quite aggressive and can cause some issues even when the model is relatively close to the camera. The ideal solution is to manually set up more suitable LODs, but that is beyond the scope of this tutorial, so I'm just going to deactivate generate LODs entirely. And most importantly right here, I'm going to enable force disable compression, because I need high quality UVs. Right up here under actions, I'm going to select extract materials and I'll come to my materials folder, create a subfolder for Cloth Dancer, and I'm going to extract the materials to that folder, just like that, and re-import that GLB. With that, we're ready to go. Let's come down to the materials folder, the Cloth Dancer subfolder, select all of those newly created materials, right-click and convert to shader material. This step is very important, don't forget to do this. With that done, we can select our imported GLB, right-click, and let's create a new inherited scene. There we are. Let me zoom in a little bit. And I'm actually going to turn the sun around so we can get a better look. There we go. Okay, so select the top level of this hierarchy right here. And come over to the VAT Man panel. First thing, add a VAT controller. And now let's go to the exported data folder. And we'll get those VAT settings from the text file. We'll select all the text and copy back to Godot and paste all that text into this text field window right there and click on Load. And now the manager is ready for my assets pertaining to this VAT model. Click on the icon for displacement texture and browse to the cloth dancer folder where I saved those textures. I'll select the VAT displacement texture right there and do the same thing for the normals texture. Now we'll select those previously exported materials, go to the materials folder, cloth dancer, select all three of those materials and click on Open. Now with all that ready to go, click on Apply Settings and you'll see your model take the shape of the first frame of your first selected animation. Catwalk animation, then we have rumba, hip hop, walk and jog. We can't see the animation playing just yet, but we can scrub through the animation to see all the frames and to check for any possible errors, which will then be fixed by the correction sliders right here, one for each material. And you also have the option to enable or disable smooth shading. I'm going to leave smooth shading on for all of these materials. And with that, the VAT is correctly set up, and all I have to do is to add the textures to my materials. So I will select the material and open the inspector panel. Right here under shader parameters, these are all the parameters available for the VAT materials. We're interested in the albedo texture, the roughness texture, and the normals texture. So I'll drag those in. That's albedo, then roughness, and finally her normal map. Now we need to tell the shader to use the textures in some of these cases. We'll tell it to use the albedo texture. You can see the result. We'll also tell it to use the roughness texture, but it will automatically use the normals texture and doesn't need to be told to do so. So that's the body material sorted. Very quickly, I'm going to do the eyes material. Same thing, drag over the albedo texture, tell the shader to use it, and I'm going to let the shader use a simple value for the roughness in this case. I'll drag that down to make the eyes shiny. And smooth shading with no normal map will be sufficient. Finally, we'll do the skirt material. I have an albedo texture for it, so we'll drag that in. I also have a normal texture, but I don't have a roughness texture. So we'll turn on albedo use texture, select a suitable roughness value for the skirt, and the materials are complete. With that, I can save this newly created scene. I'll create a new folder for saved characters and models. So I'm going to call that folder Objects. And this particular object I'm going to call very simply Cloth Dancer. And there we go. I can close this window, back to the main window, and let's drag her into the main scene. From the Objects folder, there it is. And there she is, animated and happily dancing along. With her selected, I can come back to the VAT Man panel and cycle through those animations, change them at will. And we have some options here to freeze the animation on start and the number of loops that we want the animation to play. If I choose freeze on start, you'll see she goes to the first frame of the animation and then stops instantly. And I can also choose to have her play through one or more repetitions of the animation and no more. Or I can enter a value of 0, and that'll give me infinite repetitions. And that is all there is to know about the VAT Man panel. Okay, I'm just going to zero out the transform for my cloth dancer here and move her off to the side so I can drag in the particle snake demo. Let me just close all these folders that I created for the dancer And I'll create another subfolder in the textures folder for my particle snake. Now let's drag in the GLB. This is a much bigger model with many more vertices, so Godot is going to hang for a fair bit. Let's just let it do its thing. Okay, there we go. And now I'll drag in the two VAT textures and we should be ready to go. I'll select the VAT textures as before and set the import settings. Compress 2 should be disabled and re-import. Now let's open the GLB by double-clicking on it. And again, give Godot some time. There are a lot of vertices. Okay, first I'm going to zoom way out here because otherwise the editor will be very slow. As before, I'll deactivate generate LODs and I'll enable force disable compression to get those high quality UVs. And as before, I'll extract the materials, create a new folder for particle snake, select and extract. Do a little waiting yet again. And there we go. Now finally click on re-import. And we should be good. Okay. Straight down to the material and convert it into a shader material. Right-click the material and then convert to shader material. Click convert and we're good. Select the GLB, right-click and create a new inherited scene. Select the top level node and let's come over to the VAT Man editor. We'll add a VAT controller and now let's go and get the VAT settings for the particle snake. I'll remove all the previous text and paste the new settings. Now click on load and now let's go get our textures. Textures, particle snake, first the displacement and then the normals. Now we'll get the materials, or material, there's only one in this case. There we go, and apply settings. I'm going to turn off smooth shading, and let's scrub through the animation to see where we need to correct, because we almost certainly will. In fact, there we go. Let's see how much it takes. Not very much. 0.042 should do. Okay, excellent. Now then, let's go and have a good look at the material and the shader parameters offered to us by the VAT Man. We've already seen that if we have an albedo texture, we drop it here and then we use this checkbox to tell the shader to use that texture. In this case, I don't have a texture in the slot, so you see the material go white. These options are self-dependent, so if I want to use a texture, I need to check on Use Texture. And if that texture is a texture atlas, I'll then check on this little checkbox right there. This checkbox will have no effect if this one is off, so they are codependent. As are these two right here, Use Particle Age and Use Particle Random. When we're not using a texture and we don't have any of these particle options checked on, this is the primary color for the material. But we have two of these color inputs. Now why is that? Well, that's if we have chosen to use particle age, then this is the color that the shader will use when the particle is just born, and this is the color that the shader will use as the particle grows older. Let's use black and white, just like that. And if you remember when I baked this particle system, let me show you in Blender, I checked on this option here to generate random indices baked into the UV maps of the particles. To take advantage of that feature, I'll check on Use Particle Age to use particle colors and then check Use Particle Random. And now I can change those colors as I see fit. And that is just about the long and the short of the albedo options offered to you by the VAT Man material. Right down here we have similar options for roughness. We have the option to use a texture and the option to treat that texture as an atlas. Let me just show you those options a little better so you can actually see them. If we're not using a texture, this is the value that the shader will use for roughness. And just below that we have options for normals. If we're using a normal map, it'll go right there, but the shader will pick that up automatically and doesn't need to be told to use it. It does, however, need to be told to treat the texture as an atlas by checking on this little option right there. And here we have the option to turn on and off smooth shading. And there you go. Those are all the options afforded to you in terms of shader parameters by the VAT Man material. So let's just save this object. I'm going to set the material to use random colors, just like that, and drag the object into the main scene. And there it goes. And that is how you use the VAT Man in Godot.